Bang, bang. What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are really excited about this interview. I really enjoyed it. I think you will as well. But before we get into that, make sure that you like this video so that more people on YouTube can find it. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And don't forget that BlockFi is the sponsor today. They've got 3 products. You can buy and sell crypto on their crypto exchange. You can deposit crypto and earn up to 8.6% APY in an interest-bearing account, or you can deposit crypto and take out a US dollar loan against your crypto collateral. You can use the description right here, or you can go to blockfi.com/pomp to learn more. All right, let's get into this episode. I hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Joop here with me. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
For sure. Let's just jump right into your background. What did you do before remote.com?
Yeah, I have a background in neuroscience. So I worked as a neuroscientist for a number of years. And I left that because I discovered Hacker News and I wanted to be part of tech. I started first by starting a startup that went nowhere. I ran out of money within 3 months and I had 0 money left. So I had to find a job. I started working as a programmer somewhere in the Netherlands. And there I met Sid, who was starting this crazy little startup. And he was like, yeah, maybe you should join me. The startup turned out to be Gitlab. So I joined the team when it was founded and helped grow that to 500 employees or so for 5 years. And I left Gitlab specifically to found Remote. So that's a real short story.
We got to talk about Gitlab real quick, because I think that there's a lot of people who find that story fascinating. What was your biggest learning or takeaway from those 5 years?
I think the single biggest learning was that you can build a highly successful team without ever having an office, without ever seeing your colleagues, or at least maybe once a year. Do that all online, and not just you can do it. I think the one thing that we've learned was that there are so many advantages to doing that, and everybody's learning this today, that this is probably the preferred way of building a business. It's much more efficient and it gives significant more freedom to individuals. You just have to learn to live without an office.
So what is the secret to doing it though, right? We know it's possible. We see some examples. Gitlab, I think, is the largest remote company in the world. What is the secret to making it a high performance team?
That's a good question. I don't think there's one secret. I do think that there's a few realizations you have to make. One is you get a lot of stuff for free with an office. You walk into the office, you see your colleagues, you see them at the water cooler, all those like micro interactions, even just seeing people at their desk, you get them for free in an office. You completely lose them in a remote setting, but they need to be replaced. And it means that because what do? They help build cohesion within your team. They make sure that people bond with each other. And it makes that they have a better rapport with each other. And it makes working together easier and collaboration easier. And, there's more serendipity, as people often say. And so in a remote setting, you get a lot of stuff for free, but that you don't get for free. And what you have to do to solve that is you have to create those moments where people come together. There's not an agenda, or not necessarily an agenda. There is maybe something that, takes away your focus so that you're not just focused on talking with each other. And it can be playing a game, having like just a hangout together, virtual drinks, whatever else. But you need to create those kind of moments. And you need to do that consistently. You have to do that at different times to accommodate for people's schedules. You have to do that for different interests, because not everybody's interested in hanging out in a particular way. Not everybody is interested in games. And so that takes significant effort to be able to achieve that. But if you do achieve that, that basically solves the biggest problem of remote work, which is the feeling that you lose serendipity and you're feeling that you lose this office sense.
So it sounds like intentionality becomes a core piece. What about like systemization of stuff? I think that's one thing I've heard from a lot of folks is just like you've got to build different types of systems, but also a lot more systems, because you've got to be more intentional about how the work gets done.
Yeah, I think the most fundamental thing is that you have to think about the single source of truth for any piece of information. And in that single source of truth, you have to log everything, every decision, every action, every event. And so that means that if you are talking about your company culture, for example, there has to be a company handbook. Everybody has to regularly contribute to that and update it. Everybody has to regularly read it and search through it. That's the simplest of things. And that's basically, if you start a remote organization, open a company handbook. But this relates to literally everything you do. If you are working on a project, you use some project management tool, then you have to make sure that if you and I have a discussion about something, about a particular task in there, that we write down this is what we discussed, and this is the conclusion we had. And if you don't do that, what is going to happen is that you're going to create an organization where people have to constantly ping each other. And they have to call each other. They have to send each other Slack messages. And this is actually one of those things that you hear very often, right? Like, I hate working remotely because I feel like I'm always being attacked by notifications. And the problem is that you have to, you're not writing things down. People can't self-serve to the information. And so you have to create a system for this. And the system has to be write everything down. Write down decisions, write down actions. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It has to be just be something. If you write something down, that's much better than nothing. And that something has to live in the one place where you write things down. So you can also not have like, Google Docs is a great tool, but really bad for this because they're hard to parse through, and you're going to end up with 1 million docs, and you're going to have to ping people not to ask what is the outcome, but you're going to ask them, well, where is this Google Doc? And so you need to have like a tool like Notion, or if you use project management tool like Asana, where you write down, this is where this information lives, and everybody knows where to find it. That is absolutely fundamental. Without that, your organization is going to feel horrible because you always have to be on calls.
Yeah, it's so funny too, because what the intentionality and the systemization really does is it leads to a more efficient organization as well. Yeah. Like there's something to be said if you took that same intentionality and brought it to the regular workplace, how much more productive would people be in office as well, right? Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. I want to go through a hypothetical situation, right? You've built a number of remote teams. You run a company that is specifically focused on people running remote teams. And the hypothetical situation is today I run a business. It's fully centralized. I want to run a remote organization. How do I basically remote enable my business? So kind of let's start at the very beginning. I make the decision, okay, I want to become a remote organization. What do I do? Like, what are those first steps or first considerations that I should look at?
Yeah, I think exactly what I was just saying. You have to have a place for documentation, even if it's just to write down like, this is how we work. And many offices don't have that because, you walk into the office, you sit at your desk, that's how you work. If you have a meeting, you go to the meeting room. So you start there. I'm going to create some sort of documentation where everybody can contribute and help expand that. And I'm going to write down, this is how we work. And how we work starts with, we all work 100% of the time remote. It means that you can be in the office, you can be at home, you can be the other side of the planet, but your behavior should always be the same. And those behaviors are exactly what I was just saying, which is you write down decisions, you write down processes as a new process come up or processes that might exist or might change. And anything that you do has to be remote accessible. So even if everybody's still going to the office, most of the days, you have to start running meetings as if a remote participant might join. And that means that if you're in an office and you sit in a meeting room, you have to have a setup there that makes sure that people can join from the outside. Or, and this is actually what we end up doing sometimes at Gitlab, is we were in the same building, but everybody sat behind their laptops on Zoom, which feels very weird, but it's very useful because it makes that the difference between remote participants and local participants is near zero. Everybody has the same exact view. That is where you start. You start by writing those decisions down and saying, this is how we work. Everything else is essentially secondary. It depends on like what your preferences are. I think, and we see this at the remote very frequently because of what we do, but the nicest thing is that the moment you start doing that, you realize that there's no necessity to be in the office anymore. And if there's no necessity to be in the office, the pool of people that I can hire goes from the ones that want to live close to the office or live already close to the office to literally the entire world. And that's, of course, very powerful.
So after I decide, okay, I'm going to do documentation, I'm going to be remote first, 100% remote, as you described it. How do I go about evaluating these tools, right? It feels like everyone now sees that there's this remote shift happening and everyone's building tools all over the place. And rather than being attacked by notifications, I'm attacked by all these different product pitches. What are some of the things I should look for in the tools? Or how should I go about evaluating what actually is going to be effective for me and my organization?
Yeah, this space is moving incredibly fast. So what I'm going to say today is going to be completely outdated in a year from now. So I'm going to be very careful about that. I think there's a big difference in tools made for small teams compared to large teams. And with small teams, I mean, teams smaller than 20 or so people. You will have to make decisions for the entire organization. So if your organization is significantly larger, the amount of tools that you can actually use becomes very, 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 very slim. First thing, don't go too crazy with tools. You don't want to have a million tools. Like it just overwhelms people, right? The onboarding experience of joining an organization and being told like, well, these are the 20 tools we use, and then you have to learn what information goes where. That's not a good experience. So that's where I would start. I would start very simple. You need something to do video calls. If your team is big, it has to be Zoom. Nothing else supports large amount of teams, right? If remote, we have like 100 something employees. Zoom is the only one that will really work. But if you have a smaller team, there's loads of amazing companies. Like for example, Whereby that build really nice video tools. And then it's just a matter of flavor. Like what do you like? It doesn't really matter. It just has to get a point across. Beyond that, I would say, as we were discussing earlier, there has to be some sort of tool that gives you a sense of presence. And the best way to easily reach this is to have an audio-only tool. So you can use Zoom for this, but it's actually kind of heavyweight. And there's lots of really great tools that you can use specifically for this. And the whole purpose of the tool should be, I join a room or whatever, a channel, and I can talk with my colleagues while also doing other work. So it feels like easy, low threshold to join. It doesn't feel like heavy, like the people are watching me while I'm doing it. And I can talk with my colleagues and I can easily leave or switch channels. There's also lots of tools for this. Tandem is pretty good, which connects directly to Slack. But what we use at Remote, for example, we just use Discord, which is used by millions of people around the world. And is actually really, really great for this. And then, the documentation piece is really tricky. There's very few tools today that are good, let alone tools that are great at scale. I would say that there's 0 tools that are great at scale. At GitLab, we did it fully custom. We used GitLab. We published that as a static website. And that was good because it forced us to build a lot of features into GitLab to make it easier to use that, but it's still not like the ideal experience. I think tools like Notion and Slides and Coda and Almanac, those are really great tools to do this, but they are not yet made for very large teams. So at Remote today, we use Notion internally, and Notion had a bunch of downtime recently. That is very painful if that's like your most important source of information. But also it's like we have so much information there today that the search is not very good. So that's still very early days. My answer to that is like literally just try out what works for you. Like it's very early days. I think none of them are good enough yet to like support larger teams. But if your team is like, below 20 people, you basically use all of them. Make it all pretty good. And that's it. And then beyond that, you probably already have a project management tool. If it's not online or accessible online, I don't know what tool you're using. So probably already good in terms of tools. And, I would say, make a decision in your company about how you're like, what kind of communication is expected. So you have teams that say, well, we are fully asynchronous. So it's not important to be responsive to messages in Slack, for example. There's many teams that nowadays choose to like not use Slack at all. And they use something like Twist or the new one that was just released, Quail, which looks really nice. But most teams just use Slack and it's fine, or Microsoft Teams. And then that's basically it. Beyond that, it's all the tools that you're already using, project management tools, CRM, etc.
So one of the things I want to talk about is this idea of asynchronous communication versus synchronous. First, just describe kind of the two different camps of thought, and then what you see as the pros and cons between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's one versus the other. I think that's an important start. Right now, we are talking synchronously, right? We're in the same time, we're in the same location, directly replying to each other, which is very good. And it's the most personal way to communicate, and it's great for a quick back and forth. If we were to do this asynchronously, what would happen is you would ask me a question, I would answer it whenever I wanted, which makes the cycle time of having a conversation extremely long. The advantage of asynchronous communication is that if there's no expectation of a direct answer, it means that I can reorganize my own time. So I can have a block of work in the middle of the day of 4 hours where I say, I'm doing deep work and I'm not responding to any incoming things, notifications from Slack and whatever. And then I squeeze in all the little messages, requests, and everything else in a particular block in the day, and I'm going to respond to them there. And that is really what asynchronous work is all about, that you get the freedom to reorganize your own time and respond to things whenever it's best for you. And there's two reasons to do this. One is that if you start working remotely, you immediately run into the need to have flexible time. You don't have to be in the office anymore. Might as well just work whenever you want. And the second one is that if you do that, and if you have flexible time, you can hire from anywhere, and people will be in other time zones, and they will be sleeping when you're working, which essentially makes this required. And so that's what asynchronous work allows. It's very important to realize that one is not a replacement for the other. You can work asynchronous most of the time. It's still very pleasant to just talk to someone. And if you have a quick back and forth, or if you really want to collaborate on something, yeah, you should probably just set up a call or like work together at the same time in like Figma on the design. That's essential to work. So I wouldn't necessarily, like remote, we do a lot of asynchronous work, but we do a lot of synchronous work as well. It would be impossible to just, actually, now that I'm saying it, Almanac, this company that makes one of these dogs, they did an async week last week where they only worked asynchronously. So there were no Slack messages, there were no calls whatsoever, there were no scheduled meetings, and they only work asynchronously. And I think one of the things that happens if you do that, one is you feel like you have a lot of time to get work done. It's great. But the downside is you feel alone. like you're just doing work by yourself and no one responds to you. And that's not the most pleasant experience. So yeah, pros and cons of both, but asynchronous work is fundamental to making remote work well.
I want to talk also about another form of the synchronous communication. You alluded to it earlier. Is this idea of almost whether it's a Zoom room, right, where kind of somebody has a personal room, you can jump in at a certain time and you know they'll be there. Whether it's some sort of audio communication where everyone's just kind of hanging out, the audio's on. If you want to talk, you can talk. If not, then you're just all kind of doing work. What do you find is one, the best way to do it? You mentioned Discord for you guys, but are there other specific tools? And then two, like, what is the best way to implement something like that? Is it literally just, hey, everyone's going to get on at 11 o'clock, we're going to stay on for 2 hours and we'll figure it out? Or is there more kind of intentionality to it around maybe, hey, for the first 30 minutes, we're going to do something. And then there's an hour and a half of everyone just kind of being connected. And if you want to talk, you can. Like, how do you guys actually run those time blocks where everyone is in a synchronous situation, but it's a little bit more passive than active?
Yeah, actually, we do multiple things. And we use different tools for different things. So we have 6 times a week bonding time, which is a 30-minute block and it's spread for me. I'm in Europe, so in the early morning for me and in a late day for me. So that in one time I overlap with APAC and the other time I overlap with the US because we have people all over the world. And that's a Zoom room. And we tend to have an icebreaker question like, what's the best food you ever ate? Or, something more interesting than that. And that's then everybody joins the Zoom room, opt in, and you just talk with each other. But then what we have is we have a Hangout. And so what the Hangout is, it's always open. We use Discord for this, but there's many tools. There's like Tandem that I mentioned earlier, but there's also tools that simulate an office environment. So you have like a 2D map and you can walk around it, like a branch, for example. And those are always on. And so our Discord audio channel is always on. And sometimes people leave messages in Slack to say like, I am in Discord, I'm hanging out there, but it's always on. People just join whatever they feel like throughout the day. And people go in and out. And you set it up, you create an expectation around the organization. And then in the beginning, especially if your team is larger, you have to seed it a little bit. So you have to, like, especially as leadership, hang out there very frequently. Tell people, I'm hanging out here, come chat with me. But over time, people start to pick it up and they, hang out there and chat with each other. But yeah, it's just a matter of like setting up the Discord, buying this app, and just always having it on. And it's nice. It actually creates this idea of like, there's some presence, which is, one of the things that you lose with remote work is a sense of presence. And this helps them.
For sure. Let's talk about offsites. So the whole idea of like bringing people together physically in the same location versus having people be remote all the time. What's the best practices there, and how do you guys run those?
Yeah, well, since COVID, we haven't done anything. But and before COVID, we were a very small team, and we would actually meet up every single month because we were all in the same country at the time. So it was very, very easy. The way we are going to do it post-vaccine at remote is very similar to how we did it at Gitlab, which is once a year, once every 9 months, bring the whole company together at great expense in a nice location, in a hotel, and for several days, and then just focus on bonding and having fun. So not getting work done, not making plans, but just about bonding within the team. And then provide budget so that people are encouraged to meet up either locally or even throughout the world. So one thing 2 of my colleagues at Gitlab did is they spent 6 months traveling the whole world and they went to different colleagues in different countries. And so we had a policy which essentially came down to, well, you're going to get X budget if you visit one person. So if you're going to visit 10 different colleagues, your budget increases. Generally, I would say we strongly encourage people to get together because it's nice. And so at Remote, we have a policy. We will pay for lunch. If it's like 4 colleagues coming together, we will always pay for lunch because we want them to do that. And then the time you spend however you want it. It's nice to work together, but it's also nice to just hang out.
Yeah. And so I guess as part of this, do you think about bringing the entire team together at any one point? Or is it actually more advantageous to say, hey, everyone in APAC or everyone in the US, everyone in Europe, and almost do it like on a team product or like a division standpoint? Like, I guess you've been doing this for so long, like you've probably seen people do everything and try all these different things. What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, we tried both. And at Gitlab, we kept doing, and we're going to do the same at Remote, at least having everybody get together a year, which is really hard to pull off because it's not going to be everybody. It's going to be 70, 75% or so. Some people have to fly for 24 hours. If you're deep in India and you're meeting in the middle of the US, it's horrible. You're going to be people that are going to get stuck in border control, which also happened a bunch of times. But it is something special. The one thing that Remote grew really fast over the past year. And sometimes I still have is this really real? We have our all hands and I see 100 people behind their camera, but I'm like, is this real? And I think the nice thing about really bringing everybody together is exactly that. It's it feels real, and it's nice to have dinner with these people and see everybody together. It's something special, and there's something there, and I think it's worth spending the money on. Bringing teams locally together, or even just particular regions, has certainly similar kind of benefits, but it's more restricted. It's more, where you're going to make the cutoff. It's more difficult to do. I think what works really well is if you do it by, the sales team gets together. The sales team has an offsite, and then yes, people still fly all over the world, but it's a smaller team, which makes it much more manageable. Or for example, a team that works on a particular product.
Absolutely. When you think through remote.com, go back to, last year, before the pandemic hits, you've got this idea. What was that original idea? And then walk me through kind of what's transpired over the last 12 months or so, because as you mentioned, you have grown very, very quickly.
Yeah. So I left Gitlab specifically to solve the problem we faced there, which is every time we would interview someone and then try to hire someone in a country where we never hired someone before, we are faced with, how do we pay them? How do we, make sure we're compliant? How do we provide them benefits? And it turns out if you hire someone in a different country, you have to comply with local labor laws. And that means you have to run local payroll. And to run local payroll, you have to have a local entity and a local bank account. It's a lot of work. And so there's a bunch of vendors in the world that tried to solve that problem, and they did a terrible job. So terrible that we would lose employees because they said, well, I can't count on receiving my pay slip or even my money on time. So Remote was founded specifically to solve that problem. And early on, we thought, well, we're just going to work with a bunch of local partners, and that will allow us to do exactly this. What we discovered really quickly was that is not viable for us. We want to create a really excellent business. We want to be very fast, but we also want to be very cost effective. And the only way for us to really do that is to vertically integrate. And so we founded Remote in early 2019, and we spent, about 16 months just setting up the infrastructure so we could be able to run payroll in, at the time, 4 different countries only, and actually employ people as employer of record for other organizations. So it took us a very long time. And April last year, we started opening the doors to run payroll, provide benefits, etc. for employers. And I think in May or so, we started with the first few employees. We were starting to feel already the pressure because, in March, COVID happened across the world. Suddenly, there was a huge boom related to remote work. We were called Remote. It's a pretty good name to have in this time. And the demand was overwhelming. For us to be able to open a new country, it takes anywhere between 3 months to more than a year, and significant expense. It's a very complicated process. So we saw massive demand, and we tried to expand to as many countries as possible. So we went that year from doing nothing in revenue to doing millions in revenue by the end of the year. Our team scaling, I think, from 10 or 15 people early in the year to over 80 by the end of the year. And today, I think about 140 internally.
What's been the craziest part about it all? You mentioned earlier, like when you saw the wall of all the videos, but what's been like the biggest surprise or the thing that just has hit you and been like, wow, this is working?
The mission of the company is to just provide opportunities to people everywhere. And I think it is really cool to see the amount of people that are now able to like get jobs, really well paying jobs with really amazing companies. So we see really, really cool companies as our customers that hire people literally all over the world, often in countries where, I didn't know where they were before until we opened a branch there, or, I had no idea about. And I think one of the nice things is that we look at the data and everybody that is employed through us is really well compensated, And that's very inspiring because that's what I believe in. I live in the middle of nowhere myself. And I think like, it should not really matter where you live, where you grow up, or where you have to be because of, family reasons, for example. You should still be able to earn like a great wage. You should be able to have an awesome job and like have a good career. You shouldn't have to move to a particular city. And yeah, we're seeing that is possible. And that feels, when it was like one or two people, I was like, yeah, it's a fluke, man. These people don't know what they're doing. But now we have hundreds of people employed through us, and yeah, that's really, really cool to see.
I love it. When you think about the international hires, payment complexity is one of the biggest nightmares when it comes to all of this. There's a lot of people who think that Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies could be the solution there. You guys, for a number of reasons we'll get into, can't really use some of those currencies or digital currencies as a solution. Talk us through just what are the problems first with the international payment and payroll, and then we can talk about some of the solutions that you've had to build.
Yeah. So payroll itself is complicated, but like you can figure it out. But the payments are the real pain. So there's a lot to unpack here. First off, if you are employed locally, you have to be paid in local currency. So if you're employed in the Netherlands, you get euro. If you're employed in the United States, you have to be paid in USD. Those are easy. In many countries, the local currency can be either highly volatile or it can just be very hard to find anyone that can actually convert the currency for you. It can actually be a problem. On top of that, receiving money is harder than it sounds in many different places. We often have, and often as in like literally every day, problems paying directly into someone's bank account in a particular location. Either people don't have a bank account, which still happens. There's a lot of cash-only places, or banks are just unreliable or hard to work with, or don't support, modern ways of transacting money. There's an infinite amount of problems. And then for us specifically, we tend to have a local bank account. Opening a local bank account is incredibly difficult. It's harder to open a local bank account than it is to set up a local entity in most cases. I had to fly to multiple countries, and post-COVID, I have to do all sorts of weird things. I literally have different colored pens on my desk because I have to wet sign so many documents every day it's the kind of stuff just to open a bank account is crazy. And then once we're there, it still tends to be incredibly hard to just work with them at all. And then we, as a business, we have to think about, our customers, we invoice them in whatever currency they want. And then we want to pay out directly in local currency. But we have to account for currency fluctuations, and we have to somehow deal with FX there. That's really challenging as well. And then once you think, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hedge, right? I'm going to hedge a little bit on the currency. That's not allowed. You can't do that. You have to have a specific license to be able to hedge fund. So okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to estimate how much it's going to cost, and then we're going to charge that. Well, now, instead of just paying someone's salary, you're charging for a product. So you have to pay taxes over that bid that that's your fake hedge. There's no way out. And we face this every single day. And so, we work with a number of really large partner banks that have bank accounts all over the world. And it makes it easier, but it does not solve any of these issues, particularly compliance issues. They keep biting us. it's a nightmare.
I can tell that it's a nightmare just listening to you talk about it. And so the idea is that like cryptocurrencies, it's nearly impossible to use because of all the compliance laws, right? So there's technical solutions, but they don't meet the regulatory solutions in some situations, or they aren't regulatory solutions. And so therefore you're basically pushed back into what ends up being likely inferior technology that you have to use to comply, correct?
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, no, for sure, that's inferior technologies. It can take days for transactions to complete. And even then, they often bounce. We have all sorts of problems with it. No, cryptocurrency has a huge potential to solve these kind of things, but it's never allowed. We always have to pay in local currency. There's exceptions to this. Like if someone is a contractor, they're willing to accept it. Or, you could imagine, we haven't done this, but you could totally imagine like setting up something local that then automatically converts into cryptocurrency if everybody agrees with that. But it's never allowed for us to directly pay someone in a cryptocurrency if they're legally employed by us. In fact, the local governments are nowhere near, in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of laws, nowhere near thinking about cryptocurrency. They're not even aware of the state that you can hire someone in a different country, right? Like that's in itself already a thing that we have to fight. In the majority of countries in which we operate, we have to explain what we do. And then they say, oh, you mean offshoring? And we said, no, companies just hire great people that just happen to live in your country. And like that's already pre-COVID especially, but still today, it's a really big challenge that we face. And so, it's horrible. Yeah, cryptocurrency really, like, it is a solution. It would be great if we could just, use Bitcoin for all of this, and it would totally solve everything. It would be instant. You would have it wherever you want it. We don't have to worry about borders. But now we are constantly thinking about all sorts of bank accounts. We have virtual bank accounts for customers, employees, and then we have to transact locally. It's a nightmare.
When you think about kind of zooming out and looking forward 5 or 10 years, is every company remote? Are there still companies that are heavily centralized going into offices? Is it kind of a coexistence, like the centralized in-office companies have a remote option? Just where do you think this is all going?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think not everybody wants to work from home, right? So you're going to want to have a place out of your home to be able to work from. And I think, there will be plenty of companies that will provide office space. Of course, there's plenty of co-working space, and those will continue to do better and better. But there will be many companies that will continue to have offices, or even prefer to have offices. What I do think is that governments and laws are pushing for, sort of forcing remote work in a lot of ways. We see this in the Netherlands, where the law essentially states like, unless there's really good reason that you cannot do your work remotely, any individual should be allowed to do all of their work remotely if they please. And that's the direction we're going into, especially for like tech companies or companies that have, valuable talent. It's not doable to just seek in your immediate surrounding anymore. Like if you want to find a great developer, there's thousands right now looking for a remote job. But if you happen to live in location X, there might be 3 around you. So we will see a push in law towards allowing remote work. But I think in reality, there's going to be many companies that will still have offices, but more and more they will go to like flex kind of offices, or, offices where, a small subset of the people will be. There will be notable exceptions, I think. I think companies that will say, well, we like to work from the office. And I think there will be many people that are very loudly will proclaim, I will always work from an office. But it's to be expected. I think that's fine. Like, we will never get an office at remote, other than the ones that local governments force us to have, of which we have a few. If we were to have a big office, I would also enjoy going there. Like, I'm not a person that's like against that. I just value the freedom that remote work gives me more than being in that kind of office. And that's the trend I think it will go.
I think it makes a ton of sense. And it feels like, to me, this is a trend that is not going to slow down anytime soon. Yeah. Before we get into the rapid fire questions to wrap it up, and then you'll get to ask me one question, where should we send people to find you on the internet or find more about remote.com?
Well, yeah, remote is very easy. Remote.com. I can't get it wrong. And me, you can email me directly. It's just Job@remote.com, or you can find me on Twitter, which is my first name, VO, Job VO.
All right. Before we get into rapid fire, how did you get the URL? There's got to be a good story here.
No, someone else was running business on it. So I said, I have a good idea. I think I could do better what you're doing right now. And I'm lucky that like the owners of them, they worked with me and my co-founder Marcelo, and we came to an agreement. They're small shareholders in Remote today, so that's how it worked out. So I don't like to say that it was expensive. I think is probably an understatement given how well Remote is doing.
I was going to say they're probably very, very happy that they did that deal, right?
They are entrepreneurs themselves and they're doing well. But yeah, I don't think they mind.
I love it. All right, first question is: what is the most important book that you've ever read?
I think it's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. It's a really, really fun book. It's not very long. It's like 200 pages. And the reason why I say that book is because that set me off on like studying neuroscience, becoming like very deterministic person in sense of like how I think about the world. And that led in neuroscience, I think that I got the foundation of the person who I am and how I think about things, which is you have to really know your shit. That's how I think about it. Like if you don't know something, you just shut up and you make sure that you figure out what. And that, yeah. So, and that book basically started all that off. I love that book, and I read it through it in like one day, and that started that whole journey.
That's a great suggestion. Second question is more personal. Sleep schedule. I used to not sleep at all. And then our friends over at 8 Sleep got me on this thermoregulated bed. I basically crank it as cold as possible, sleep like a baby, sleep 8 or 9 hours now, and feel like my life's been changed. What is your sleep schedule and how has that changed over time?
Oh, I wanted 8 Sleep so bad. I don't think they shipped them to Portugal or the Netherlands. I wanted it so bad.
I'll help you get one. Don't tell anybody.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks.
They're gonna kill me for every time I talk to someone in Europe, like they don't ship here. I'm like, let's see what we can figure out. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I really want one. I have 2 kids, below one of 2 and one of 7 months. So usually, like I work really hard. I take care of them, and so I sleep when they let me, and I wake up whenever they wake up. So this morning, last night I went to bed at 11, and I woke up at 6:30 because my daughter jumped on me. So that's it.
I have 2 types of people who don't get great sleep: either workaholics or people with young kids. Those are the 2 times when people don't get good sleep. So you fit in one category for sure. Last question is about aliens. Are you a believer or a non-believer?
No, I think there's a good chance that there's some life somewhere, given the size of the universe and amount of stars and planets there are. I think one interesting thing I think about very often is how poorly we can actually observe the universe directly from the Earth or even through satellites, right? If we think about like how many moons Jupiter has, for example, we're like, oh, there's a lot of them. But now and then there's some that we're not sure if there's another moon. There could be another moon. And you're like, but the solar system, we know that really, really well. And if you think about like the fact that we know that so poorly and that the universe is so incredibly big, like, yeah, I think it's reasonable that there's life somewhere. I would, I'd be curious to see it or meet it, whatever it would be. Yeah.
I definitely think there's life out there somewhere. So we'll see. What one question you have for me to finish up?
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot about creating opportunity anywhere and sort of blurring borders, right? I think borders are, the bane of my existence. And I think the internet helps a lot with that. And I think, tools like Zoom in its easiest, but in the future, like VR and AR. What do you think the future of countries is like? Will there still be countries in, I don't know how many years?
I think there will definitely be countries. I kind of think of that as like, that's a manifestation of the physical and analog world, right? Is people will always argue over who owns what land and where the line is and, all that kind of crazy stuff. And then, there's a very strong argument for good governance, right? And I think that it's easy for us all to latch onto the bad governance of governments and say, look at these idiots. They're just wasting money and making our lives harder. But they do provide a lot of good benefits as well in cases, right? Everything from national defense all the way on down. And so I think that it's not a thing of like, will they ever disappear? It's more so like, what will they look like? And I think the part that I'm most excited about is competition in the open market. So if people can now live wherever they want, governments will compete for those citizens. And you see that, inside the United States, you see cities and states doing it kind of on a more micro level. But on the macro level, you're going to see countries do it. And so if all of a sudden you can choose between, Estonia, Singapore, Portugal, the United States, Argentina, or Nigeria, where are you going to go? Like, there's a couple of core things that people care about. And so I think that having that competition is a good thing. It'll ultimately breed kind of much stronger nation states and much more attractive environments for the citizens that choose to work within those nation states. But I think that that's probably one of the most exciting yet most misunderstood things about the future. Like, what does it look like? I have no clue. It just feels like free market competition is good for everyone, right?
Yeah, that's what I hope the direction we're going into. I have, as an EU citizen, I have a lot of freedoms within the EU and even outside of the EU. But I have friends, from Ukraine, for example, that are severely limited in where they can travel. And even if they travel, it's a pain, even to like very otherwise, very open countries. And my hope is that, borders dissipate with this competition. And I'm curious to see if everybody's going to live in Portugal where the weather is always good, or whether, it will actually be more evenly distributed.
You are Portugal's #1 salesman. I love it. All right, listen, thank you so much for doing this. I really, really enjoyed it. I think that what you guys are building is obviously a no-brainer, and the remote trend is not going to slow down anytime soon. So if anyone out there is thinking about moving to a remote organization or running one, I heavily suggest go check out remote.com. They pretty much have everything you need in order to run your organization, do payroll, pay people, etc., and do it all in a compliant way. So I appreciate the time. We'll have to do this again in the future.
Thanks, Anthony.